brought you to South Africa?
Well, we have been invited by the progressive forces of South Africa, led by the Communist Party, for a solidarity conference to look at the situation of Somaliland and to support the cause of Somaliland. And that's what's happened in the past 2 days. And the meeting ended very well. It ended with a communique which said that, the Somaliland needs to be supported and needs to be engaged politically and economically as well.
All right, so you delivered a speech at the conference. In the main, what was your message to those that were there?
Well, the main message was to really put things into context. A lot of people do not know Somaliland or do not know Somaliland very well. So I went through the history of Somaliland. Somaliland, in fact, is a country with a history of over a century as a separate state, over 70 years under the British rule, and for the last 30 years on its own, from 1991 to today, 2020. And in 1960, when we got our independence from the British, the 26th of June, we were an independent state called the State of Somaliland. We had a parliament and a prime minister. And at that time, there was a lot of anti-colonial sentiment and a very strong nationalist sentiment as well. Our people wanted to bring together all the Somali inhabited territories. As you may be aware of, in 1884, the Europeans divided the Somali inhabited territories into 5, the French Somaliland and the British Protectorate and Italian Somaliland, and Ogaden, which is part of Ethiopia, and the NFD, the North District Frontier of Kenya. So the purpose was to bring all the 5 together, and in the emotion of the moment, we decided to unite with Somalia, which were former Italian colony, and we agreed to draft, our parliament to draft an act of union, and their parliament to draft an act of union, and then to negotiate a common act of union. That did not happen. In fact, the act of union drafted by our parliament was ignored, and they, forced it upon us the act of union, which the majority, they had the majority of the parliament voted for. But a year later, when the constitution was put to a referendum, our people rejected the referendum. And in that same year, a group of young officers from Somaliland attempted a coup to restore the sovereignty of Somaliland, but that failed. And then for the next 30 years, we had a very bumpy road with Somalia. We had particularly suffered in the hands of the regimes that ruled Somalia from 1981 to 1991. When finally the government in Mogadishu collapsed, and we have decided in a national conference in Bureau to leave the union because it did not work for us, it did not work for them. And since that time, we have been on our own. We started a process of reconciliation among ourselves and established a government and a charter. And later in 2001, we voted on a referendum on a new constitution, which 97% of the people voted for. Since then, we established a truly democratic system whereby we had 6 elections, 3 presidential elections, 2 councillor elections and 1 parliamentary election. And we're preparing ourselves for the 7th election coming this May. So we have been really on a democratic path and have been able to maintain security and stability in a very unstable region of Africa.
All right, so the modern Republic of Somaliland. 1991 is when you declared your independence. That's almost 30 years ago. Why is it then your country hasn't been given the sovereign status that it so desires?
Well, in fact, Somaliland is recognized de facto in general, not de jure, not yet the full recognition. And we deal and have relations with many states around the world, a state-to-state relationship. But coming back to your question as to why Somaliland was not recognized, the common excuse that's given by people outside Africa is that this is an African matter. And in fact, it has been taken to the AU. And in 2005, the AU sent a mission to Somaliland, a fact-finding mission. And the mission, when it returned, it produced a report which was very favorable and which said, the Somaliland case is a unique case and has nothing to do with opening a Pandora box in Africa, if recognized. And we're still waiting for the AU to act upon that report. But the AU, some of the members of the AU themselves, when you raise the matter with them, say, well, that's a matter between Somaliland and Somalia. Well, as far as we are concerned, it's not just a matter between Somalia and Somalia, but it's an African matter, because here you have a country and people who are denied their basic rights, simply because they are not recognized, or simply because Somalia does not want us to be recognized, which we think is totally unfair. So in the meeting we had the past couple of days, we discussed this issue, and I think it has been acknowledged and recognized that, we should not suffer simply because Somalia, doesn't want us to be recognized. And I think the people should make a decision on the facts on the ground, and the facts that, we have a legal case and a moral case and a humanitarian case to be recognized, and we believe if recognized, that will benefit the region, including Somalia itself.
So how have you been able to function since 1991 with Mogadishu on the one hand, and these borders that you've clearly defined? Is there movement between Somalia and Somaliland as you've recognized it? Is there a border that one has to cross and get a passport stamped?
Yes, well, Somaliland has a defined boundaries. The British had a protocol with the Italians, which defined the boundary between Somaliland and Somalia. And of course, you have to cross a boundary. But how did we survive? I think we survived on our own by relying on our own resources. Unlike Mogadishu, we don't have foreign troops that secure, that ensure security in our country, and we do not depend on donors and others to pay our government officers and civil servants and army. Our people pay taxes, and we use these taxes to build the schools and clinics and pay the salaries of the doctors and the nurses and the teachers and the police officers and all the civil servants, And I think that's one of the reasons why we have been stable, because we have been on our own rather than relying on others, who are sometimes, have some sort of a proxy war, in the territory in which they are.
All right, let's talk a little bit again about sovereignty. You've got clearly defined borders, as you say, but there is a disputed area of Sacad to the northeast of Somalia and to the east of Somaliland. How is this going to be resolved? Because that's part of the equation as well, isn't it?
Well, the African Union in its conference in Cairo in 1964 said that all states must respect the colonial boundaries. Not that because they were right, but because that can be a solution to all the disputes that may arise in contesting boundaries. So we have a defined boundary, not by us, but by the colonial era, and is accepted and, acknowledged by the AU. Of course, there are communities in that part of the Somaliland which you mentioned, and elders from these communities were part of the conference in which we decided to leave the union with Somalia.
That may be the case, but the Puntland still continues to dispute and won't let go of the portion that you say belongs to Somaliland.
But disputing doesn't give you the right, to a territory which is not yours. I'm quite sure we have the same situation in many African countries, people disputing the borders. But the borders are well defined internationally, so there's no dispute on that.
So the African Union, is it just taking time, or do you think that there genuinely will be movement towards full recognition and then perhaps taking the next step to the United Nations?
Well, we're confident that the AU will do the right thing, and the right thing is to recognize the right of the people of Somaliland to be a sovereign state. And once, the AU recognizes us, then, the UN, will not be difficult, But, of course, the AU and the UN as organizations do not recognize states. It's the states, the member states that recognize. But I'm quite sure with the consent of the AU, we will be recognized by the members of the AU.
So what travel documents do citizens use at the moment now to travel on?
Well, we use Somaliland passport. Of course, sometimes we use European passports or American passports, but we have our own passport. We have a service passport, a diplomatic passport, and an ordinary passport, and our people travel on these passports. And there are many countries which accept our passports. South Africa was one of the countries that, in fact, accepted our passport in the past. But recently, that has changed, and we think that's not really fair. And that's one of the things we're going to discuss with the authorities here.
Let's talk a little bit about your economy. You're a finance minister there. What is the engine of Somaliland? What keeps the country going?
Well, as I said, I think self-reliance is a big factor. But as far as the economy is concerned, our economy is basically an agrarian economy. The livestock sector accounts for up to 28% of the GDP. That's followed by the service sector, which accounts for 22%. Agriculture is about 7%, and construction and property about another 7%. The diaspora also, I think, takes, it's a big factor in rebuilding and investing in the country, which drives really development in the country. But our business people are really also very, very shrewd and quite brave. And, we started in 1991 with nothing, absolutely nothing. And the capital of Somaliland, Hargeisa, was destroyed. It was a rubble, more or less. But today it's a thriving metropolitan city with over 1 million population. And all that reconstruction has been done by our people and by our government.
How do you manage to have and enjoy so much growth, peace and stability in a very unstable region? And, literally next door, we look at Somalia and half the time there are explosions, there is fighting, there is war. How has Somaliland been able to insulate itself from what's happening very close to your country?
I think the pain we experienced, while we were with Somalia, has brought us together. And, it's really a government of the people by consent, in a way. And we have a system, whereby, we make a decision whenever we want to make a decision in which, people, whether they're in parliament or whether the elders are consulted. So it's really by consensus and consent, and also vigilance, and the history that we went through, that's helping us unite as a nation, but at the same time ensure security and, save us, from the problems of piracy and from the problems of extremism and explosions that is so common in Somalia.
So then why is it that Mogadishu won't let go?
Well, that's the question. I think that's the question which we would like to put to Somalia. As a matter of fact, starting from 2012, we decided to have a dialogue with Somalia, initially sponsored by the UK government. And the aim was to have a peaceful and amicable divorce, And since then, we had up to 9 meetings sponsored by different governments, the British, the UAE, Djibouti, Turkey, and I think the last time also the Americans were involved. But in all these meetings, really nothing substantive came out of it. We had few agreements on few issues, but they went back on all the agreements. They did not honor any of the commitments and the agreements they made in these meetings. So, we really feel, they have been deliberately, dragging their feet, perhaps thinking that one day Somaliland will come around and join Somalia. But I tell you, that's not going to happen.
In the meantime, I think you've already alluded to it. You're reaching out to Southern Africa, South Africa in particular, to fully normalize relations between the two countries, particularly when it comes to travel and recognition. How's that going?
I think, that's going well. I think there is a lot of sympathy. And by the way, we engaged with South Africa from 2000 to 2010. I think there has been just a lull in between. I think the authorities are reasonably aware of the situation in Somalia, but we would like to engage them actively. And that's because South Africa now holds the chairmanship of the AU, but also South Africa, as the biggest economy in Africa, has responsibilities as a result of that position to ensure that all Africans, have enjoy their due rights. And we believe that there's a case to answer here in Somaliland.
Let's talk a little bit about your outward relationships with other parts of the world. Africa is one aspect, and I think we've chatted a bit about that. What about other regions like Europe, North America? How much engagement have you had with other parts of the world?
Yes. Well, in fact, we have offices and representatives in 20 countries around the world, including Africa and Asia and Europe and North America, US and Canada as well. We have a large diaspora in all these countries and others, and we relate through them and directly as well. But at the same time, there are countries with consular offices in Somaliland, and that includes the neighbors, the Ethiopia, Djibouti, we have Turkey, we have the UK itself, and so we have Taiwan recently. So there are countries that have representatives in Somaliland. I think as a sign and symbol of respect for the existence and the sovereignty of Somaliland.
Do you think that you might be a victim of your own success in that because you're peaceful, you're stable, and you're literally getting on with it, that there's no sense of urgency required by the international community to give you your sovereignty?
I think that may be a factor, to be honest. We are not a naughty boy or a naughty child, and if you are not a naughty, people don't notice you. That's a factor. And sometimes we have the sense that perhaps we're being punished for being successful, and Somalia is being rewarded for failing, which is really a paradox.
What would full recognition do for Somaliland and its people? How would the country benefit from full status? Because you're already succeeding.
Yes. Well, I think there are many advantages to being recognized fully. First, at the present time, we cannot access credit from financial institutions like the World Bank or the African Development Bank because we are not a member. It's also more difficult to attract investment in big way if you are not recognized. That's another problem. We don't get any support or supplementary support in our budget. We rely on our taxes entirely. And traveling, as we have said earlier, is a problem as well, because it's very difficult for our students to go abroad and study, or for our people who seek, healthcare to go out of the country, or our traders to go out and do business in other countries. So there are a number of restrictions imposed by lack of recognition, and we think these are rights, rights are denied.
Perhaps in conclusion, what would your message be to the people of South Africa and the continent from Somaliland at this time?
Well, the message is, here is a country called Somaliland, which is an African country which denied its right to be recognized as a state. And as a result, its people suffer and are denied rights because of lack of recognition. And we think it is to the benefit of the African continent